Welcome to the Association 100 podcast. The A100 podcast is an extension of our Association 100 bi-monthly newsletter that focuses on best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies and tactics that work in the world of associations. The podcast will feature meaningful conversations with association professionals across the country, taking a deeper dive into trending topics, offering insights that both inform and inspire.
Welcome back to the A100 podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Gallagher, and I'm really excited for today's discussion. We're welcoming Dr. Alexis McKittrick, current president of the Society of Women Engineers. As we're recording this, Engineers Week is just about to start, and as you'll be listening, it's going to be underway. We're right in the midst of it, so really perfect timing for this discussion. Alexis is a SWE 20 plus year and life member, and she has served as a volunteer leader in the organization for more than 15 years, holding roles that span all facets of the society. She's also currently a program manager in the U.S. Department of Energy Geothermal Technologies Office, and she serves on the SWE board of directors in her personal capacity. I think that's something that's actually often really overlooked in associations and not talked about enough is just how much they are driven by volunteer leadership and all that goes into it and the success that comes from that. So I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation today. And Alexis, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really excited to be here, Colleen. Thanks for having me and allowing me to talk a little bit more about SWE, Society of Women Engineers.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So it's Engineers Week. Tell me a bit more about what SWE is highlighting for this week. It's significant to women in the engineering field. What does this week mean for you all?
Sure. Unsurprisingly, we're really excited always about Engineers Week. Anything that helps bring more attention to engineering, that helps bring more attention to some of the disparities, right, that we're still seeing in engineering and technology fields, we always think is a great thing. We have a number of events planned for Engineers Week. I'll just highlight a couple. So one, we're really excited that the weekend that kicks off Engineers Week, CBS's Mission Unstoppable show will be airing a segment that's sponsored by SWE and our Corporate Partnership Council that features one of our collegiate members, Taya Allen, walking through a really exciting activity with her siblings, teaching them about engineering, and of course, bringing a little bit more visibility to SWE and the work that we're doing to increase women and girls in engineering. We also have a really exciting work that is finishing up. So CBS Mission Unstoppable collaboration starting. We also have work finishing up around the 50K Coalition. And for listeners that might not be familiar with the 50K Coalition, it's a unique collaboration that is more than 40 different organizations that come together with the goal of producing 50,000 diverse engineering graduates by 2025.
Wow.
I know, isn't it? It's just such a dynamic goal. And it's been going for a number of years and actually just concluded its work in the coalition. And so as part of Engineers Week, we're going to be releasing a webinar on the Monday of Engineers Week that highlights the successes of the coalition, while also stressing the need to continue this work beyond the closure of the 50K Coalition. And then each of the leadership circle members, which include a number of different diversity organizations in engineering, will each have a clip throughout the week. And SWEs will be on Thursday. and
That's great.
Before I finish up, I just wanted to say also that Thursday is Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day. And so this is always a really core part of Engineers Week for SWE. And what typically happens for us is that our hundreds of sections and our hundreds of employer partners all across the globe unite around holding outreach events for introducing girls to engineering and technology. Sometimes there'll be professional development events at companies and organizations focused on how can we better incorporate introducing girls and young women to STEM and to engineering as part of these initiatives. So we're really excited about that always, and it's always exciting to see popping up on social media all of the different events going on that are sponsored by SWE sections and members of our Corporate Partnership Council.
I love all of that. You guys are doing some really cool things. And I just think about that last piece you talked about, how important it is to see that representation for girls. That must just be amazing and really inspiring.
Yeah, It is, and I will say we really like the term "see her, be her," and have found. I'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, as we go through about our SWE Next program, but we found that especially for young women and girls, that seeing those role models in engineering, seeing folks that look like you in engineering, is really having an impact on folks being able to connect, right, with the space and to see themselves in those careers going forward.
Yeah, definitely. So there's obviously been a lot of strides made over the last few decades in terms of women in engineering, but what do you see today as some of those most pressing challenges that women are facing in the field?
Yeah, I appreciate this question so much. There's a lot of reason for optimism, but there's also some, unfortunately, pretty stark statistics that still in 2024 are a part of our society. So women are still only earning about 13% of degrees in engineering fields. And women of color are actually facing even greater underrepresentation. So they earn about 8% of engineering bachelor's degrees. So that is obviously not where we want to be as a society.
Right.
That's not gender parity in engineering and technology. So that is one of the big pieces. And what ties back to the point that you just made, Colleen, about trying to get more girls, more young women interested in engineering and technology from a very young age, and then fostering that as they're moving into college and into the professional world. And speaking of the professional world, I would say two things that SWE is, of course, working to, or I would say they're barriers that SWE is working to reduce for women in engineering, but still persist. One is the pay gap. According to the Pew Research Center, median annual earnings for women in STEM is about 74% of men's earnings. And then, unfortunately, again, in Black and Hispanic women, we're seeing about 63% of what equivalent white men's salary would be in position. So that pay gap is still out there. There's a lot of things I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through around unconscious bias, around microaggressions, around work culture that can play into these things. But that is a reality that we are working on. And then I mentioned the progression from school to college to professional career. Unfortunately, we are still seeing this issue of the leaky pipeline for women in engineering, where approaching mid-career, we see women leaving the engineering field at a much higher rate than their male counterparts. And so again, a lot of reasoning behind that around the need for flexibility in work structures, around the kinds of environments and cultures that women in engineering and technology are encountering that really need to be addressed. We've actually done a lot of research into what are these barriers and trying to put numbers and metrics behind them. So I would encourage listeners to look at research.swe.org if you're interested in learning a little bit more about some of the numbers behind the barriers I mentioned, and honestly, a couple more that I didn't even jump into today.
Yeah, well, and those conversations I think are so important, especially post COVID when, gosh, in COVID, we saw so many women have to leave the workforce and just not having the support needed. It's been an ongoing conversation, but I think it's more important now than ever. So I love that you guys have that research, and we'll put that link in our show notes too for people to go check that out because that's really critical. One of the things I wanted to get into, and I didn't give your full background in the bio at the beginning here, but you've got an extensive background in both chemical engineering and policy analysis. So I would love to get your take on this integration of new technologies. How is that changing the future for women engineers?
Oh, absolutely. So it's shaping the future for all of us, right?
Yeah.
New tech is it's the future, like literally by definition. And I would say that the big piece is that you have to have diverse perspectives at the table when you're tackling new technologies and new challenges. We're not going to be able to solve the technology issues of the day and advance as a society without diverse perspectives. And of course, if we want to have diverse perspectives, diverse approaches to problems, that means increasing the diversity, especially in engineering and technology, to people of color, to women, to other underrepresented groups that just, again, we aren't seeing in engineering today. So that would be one piece. I would say a more practical side of new technology, if I can spin it this way, as you just mentioned the COVID pandemic. We've seen in the last couple of years, partly driven by the pandemic, a lot of new technology that's enabling changes in kind of the traditional structures of the way that we work. So while we absolutely saw, unfortunately, an exodus of women from the workplace during COVID, there also is a lot more technology available now around flexibilities, right, in the workplace, around how to work remotely and effectively that did not exist 5 years ago. And so that's an opportunity space, again, a little bit on the nose with the new technology, specifically around work environments. But I think it's really important that we as a society and companies and organizations that are engineering heavy in particular really leverage that opportunity to think about like how can we use this evolution of workplace structures and what working looks like to attract a more diverse group of engineers and technologists to the table.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you said on the nose, but that's where we've got to be. So
Absolutely. And SWE is here to support that evolution. To be clear, we've been monitoring that trend. We've been talking about it with our Corporate Partnership Council. We've been talking about it in our own strategic planning. We're working with companies and universities to ensure that they're able to create and enable those equitable and inclusive workplaces and cultures. And of course, we're working with the next generation too, to make sure as they're coming up into this new technology spaces that they have that opportunity to shape the future. And, I mentioned SWE Next a little bit earlier, and maybe I'll put a couple of numbers to that. So again, SWE Next is our free program for girls ages 5 to 18. We have over 5,000 SWE Nexters currently. I have 2 in my house.
all right.
14.
Love
and
it.
And we have over 280 clubs at different high schools all over the US. And
That's so
we're
fun.
I appreciate that. And we are excited to have a platform, right, where folks both in person and virtually can connect with resources to help them understand engineering technology, can again see her, be her, in terms of seeing women who are in different engineering fields now. We do a fantastic day in the life series where it goes through the day in the life of a chemical engineer, the day in the life of a biomedical engineer, mechanical engineer, and so forth. And it really helps folks see and connect with young women who are professionals in these fields, and again allows them to see that as their potential future. And so that's the other really big tiger, is getting more girls involved now is going to help them drive those new technologies in the future.
Definitely. And we always hear that. I mean, that how important STEM education is in terms of exploration and driving that interest. Are there any other SWE initiatives you want to talk about that are helping to engage young women and girls?
Absolutely. So I would say another one that we're really proud of that is an in-person event is our Invent It, Build It activity that happens every year at our annual conference. This is an opportunity for hundreds of girls to convene around the same venue as the SWE annual conference. So you're surrounded by women in engineering and technology, and do hands-on activities that are appropriate for both. We have both a middle school track and a high school track included. And so that is, I would say, the largest outreach activity that we do that's across society, as it is at our annual conference. But as I mentioned, we also have smaller outreach events that are held locally and regionally all across the globe. These are typically run by our professional sections and our collegiate sections. And you mentioned volunteer leaders earlier. They're largely run completely by local volunteers who just have a passion for ensuring that girls get exposure to technology and get exposure to different types of engineering to foster that mindset and that growth that, yes, you can absolutely be an engineer, and look at all the exciting, cool stuff you'll get to do if you become an engineer. So that's really a couple of other activities outside of the SWENEX platform that we really focus on. And again, it's all about those connection points, whether it's virtual resources that anyone can access or those in-person outreach activities that give you that experience to really touch engineering and understand it.
So many different touch points. That's fantastic. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about that once you're in the career. And I'd love to hear your take about what you think an engineer's role can be in shaping public policy.
Well, absolutely. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my own heart. As you mentioned in the intro, I have a background not only in engineering, but also in science and technology policy, which I fell into as I went through my career. And I will say that what that experience taught me, what that real life learning taught me, is that we need more engineers at the tables where public policy decisions are happening. We need folks who can be arbiters of data, right? If I may, I like the term speak data truth to power. And
That's fantastic.
and it is really an environment where when scientific decisions are being made at the highest level of government, you have to have scientists, you have to have engineers there. And I don't think it's a career path that a lot of engineers necessarily think of as they're studying engineering. But that ability to problem solve, right, that you develop as an engineer and technologist is 100% the same skill set that you use in public policy, because you are looking at what are the different levers, what are the opportunities, what is the data telling us, and how do we take it to the next step. It is another bent on that problem solving skill set. And I just think that, again, if we're going to continue to move forward as a society with the new technologies that you referenced earlier, with areas of science and being a leader, right, in the scientific and innovation spectrum, we're going to need more engineers there. So I'd encourage folks to think about getting involved. There's a lot of different ways to do that. The public policy spectrum is broad. It is everything from nonprofits to working with the government, to working with Congress, and there are positions in all of those different spaces for engineers. So I would encourage folks to think about that.
Yeah, in general, I'm a big proponent that policy should be shaped by the experts and the data and the science and the real truths that we know, and really making sure that that policy is effective and drives things in a positive direction.
Absolutely. And I found that if we don't have those folks at the table, it's not that the decisions don't get made. You just don't have those experts there to weigh in on them. So encourage folks, leverage, use your expertise, whether that's within your own company and helping drive scientific and technology decisions within your own company, or within broader government. There are spaces and important places for engineers that are outside of weighing in on like technical opinions only. And I think that's the point that I want to leave listeners with, is make sure you are thinking about that broader strategy, that broader public policy viewpoint, because you can have an impact on it as an engineer.
As someone who has served in a lot of capacities within SWE, I would love to hear what changes and developments you're most proud of.
I have been on the SWE board of directors for 5 years before I became president. So I had the opportunity to see SWE through, if you will, not quite the last decade, but close to it. And some of the changes I'm most proud of are, one, honestly, the way that SWE weathered the pandemic. I know the pandemic was really tough on a lot of associations, and I'm sure, Colleen, that you all have seen that in your work. And the flexibility and nimbleness that SWE and our amazing headquarters staff showed in terms of pivoting events to virtual, to really paying attention to what SWE member needs might be and how those would be changing with the pandemic. And let's make sure that we're holding virtual career fairs if we can't hold career fairs in person for a little while. Let's make sure we're thinking about expanding our virtual mentoring platform, right, to accommodate the fact that folks are not meeting in person right now. And I think that we saw that pay dividends with our membership did not decrease substantially during COVID. Our offerings increased. And it's really interesting, Colleen, to see even coming out of that, what things are sticking. So we continue to have a hybrid conference. While we have completely gone back to in-person conferences, we continue to offer the virtual component of our conference to at least be able to log in virtually to the main events, because we found that really increased the number of members across the globe that could be included in our conferences, who maybe wouldn't have had the opportunity to travel to LA, to give the example of the conference that was held last October, but they can participate now virtually. So not only proud of how SWE weathered the pandemic, but also really, really proud of our thoughtfulness around the things that we're keeping versus letting go of as we move, of course, out of and away from the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second thing that I would highlight is SWE's focus, especially over the last decade, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We purposely pivoted from focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think is a term a lot of folks listening will be familiar with, to adding the B, to adding the belonging. And while diversity, equity, inclusion are of course incredibly critical, the thought around adding the B is to go beyond representation and policies to create a genuine sense of belonging. For SWE, it's for every member in our organization. We want to make sure that those who are underrepresented in engineering are feeling like they have a space and they have a place within SWE, that they can create those networks of support. And belonging really means an environment where you feel valued, you feel accepted, you feel empowered to bring your true self to the table. And we did some hard thinking within SWE and realized that everyone within our membership might not have that feeling now. And what can we do as an organization internally to focus on DEI and B? And so that pivot is something I've been incredibly proud of SWE for, to not just be focusing on how can we help other organizations with DEI and B, but also to be looking internally and thinking about how can we support our members. We have a couple different ways we've done that. So one is our fantastic affinity groups. So these are groups that align around a particular affinity, either around a diversity characteristic, a career stage, or even there's some business interests focused affinity groups as well. And these groups are essentially open to SWE members across the globe. It is not specific to your location. It is more specific to your life experience. And we also welcome allies into these groups to help folks understand different diversity perspectives than their own, and hopefully support others while they're also supporting and nurturing themselves and their own growth. So that's one big piece. And then another one that I'm super proud of is honestly putting our work out there. So we have published a DEIB report for the last several years. I think if you just Google DEIB SWE report, the one that we published a few months ago will pop up. And I think it's important that we're transparent with these are the things that we are working on. And these are the steps that we're taking as an organization. And I would put it out to all the organizational professionals who are listening to think about, can you do something similar? Because if you don't measure it, right, and you don't put it out there, you don't put words around it, right, then you can't evaluate whether or not you've achieved success. And so I would encourage everybody to think about that, especially as we're all in different places in our DEI journeys, but I think that kind of transparency is important. And I'm so proud of SWE for that.
Wow. I just need to say I'm so genuinely impressed. That's really incredible. I think we've had the fortune of getting to talk to and know so many associations over the years. My initial career was in associations before I came over to the dark side of PR here and working on the agency side. But one thing that we've always seen and talked about is the associations that are able to change and adapt are the ones that succeed and thrive and really provide value for their members. But I think especially as I look back at 2020 and how quickly our lives changed, the associations that did things like SWE did, it's just incredible because people needed it more than ever. And to be able to do that and provide that value is just, it's really something and really important, I think.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Colleen. And the one other piece that I will add on to this is check in with your members, right? So we actually did a culture study last year to help us understand, right, are the values that the SWE board, that SWE as a whole feel like we're putting out there, is that what members are seeing? Are those the shared values with members? Do they think that we're seeing those things, or are they different? Are we aligned from a cultural perspective? And we largely got good news there from our cultural study that our members do feel like our values alignment, but we also found some things like the DEIB space and like thinking about underrepresentation of different groups within the SWE membership that we need to work on. And so to your point, like, especially coming out of the pandemic when all associations got turned on their heads a little bit, check in with your members and figure out a way to reconnect and make sure that you're aligned, right, going forward with what your members need.
Yeah, because I think the initiatives from associations that fail or when members start questioning why they belong, it's when it's just driven by solely staff. And yeah, this is what members want without ever asking. And sometimes we forget we need to check in and make sure that what we're delivering is what our members want.
Yes, yes. And to your point, especially right now, especially coming out of the pandemic, it could be, and we talked about changes in the workplace structures earlier in our conversation. There's just been so much change in the last 5 years. It is a really great time to check in and make sure, like,
Yeah.
is what we were talking about in 2020? So what you want and need, is that different? And how can you as an organization adapt to it? And again, going back to your question about what I'm proud of, I am incredibly proud of SWE for that. I think that we've done a really good job of doing that, of listening to members. Everything is not perfect, right? No organization is, and we will continue to work on it. And I think that's the important thing, is you continue to do the work to try to get that match.
There's certainly so much to be proud of, but as you look forward, what are your goals? What at the end of your presidency, what are you going to look back on and say this was successful?
I have had just an amazing ride so far, I will say, as president. So I started as president in July last year, and my term will run through June of 2024. So I'm a little more than halfway through. So I will say that the two things that I'm super proud of that I think have already started moving are, one, the theme for this year has been Live Without Limits. So every year we have a different kind of annual theme for SWE. And I think the Live Without Limits theme is really resonating with members, with our partners, as a kind of call to, like, all work together and lower the barriers that women in engineering and technology are facing. It is a call to action, not just for members, but I would say for the broader society. And so far we've seen a lot of great responses in terms of how members and how companies are working to help women engineers live without limits every day. We saw a record-breaking conference in LA in October. So that's just one event, but one that I personally am really proud of as president. And we had over 21,000 folks at our conference, which was actually breaking our previous record by a couple thousand, and included both virtual, again, and in-person attendees, as I mentioned earlier. And so that was just a really great moment to all be able to come together, especially when we've had less folks traveling in the last couple of years, all come together for a moment of shared culture and shared goals around lowering those barriers for women in engineering and technology. And then the other is 100% acting on some of those culture study recommendations that I mentioned earlier. Thinking about not only how our affinity groups can continue to serve our members, but how can we better hear underrepresented voices in the society, whether that's through focus groups, whether that's through reaching out to specific member segments, working with certain members of the community and universities and companies that are focused around these underrepresented groups. I think that's really important work that will help us create that DEIB space and continue that work. And then we also are doing a little bit more internal work around our volunteer leaders. You mentioned at the beginning how important volunteer leaders are. And that's what I think I'm going to be most proud of. We get to the end of the term is we're actively working around making sure that the board of directors has all the information they need to function as fantastic executives for the society, that our committee leaders and our section leaders are all getting the information they need, and they're all having really meaningful volunteer experiences, right? When you have folks who are coming in and volunteering their time, not getting paid, in order to support your mission, your society, you want to make sure that they have valuable and meaningful experiences. And I think we are seeing that's not always aligned within SWE. And so we're doing some hard work on that right now, which I think when we get to the end of the year, I'm going to be able to say I was really proud of.
That's exciting. And the hard work matters. And we've all got to do it. So it's great that you're taking it head on.
Absolutely. And if I can add one more that I can't believe I forgot my initial thing, our global expansion. Oh my goodness. Over the last decade, and especially the last couple of years, we've seen such an increase in our global, and I will say non-US membership. And we actually just welcomed the largest cohort of global ambassadors in SWE to date, over 200 members from 29 different countries. And that's actually a 50% increase from last year. So we literally just doubled the number of global ambassadors that we have for SWE all over the globe. And we also are excited to have over 100 global affiliates at this point. So that's essentially kind of sections of SWE members in different locations all over the globe, again, non-US. And they're in 32 different countries. So we have seen
that's a big one.
growth. That's a big, right? It is big. And again, very proud. I must say, proud of it as president. I'm very proud of the board of directors and work they're doing. We really have a large amount of thanks go to our headquarters global engagement team at SWE, who is really the driving force behind that growth. But this is it, right? We're not just looking to create gender parity within the US. We are looking to create gender parity in engineering technology across the globe. We've made fantastic strides on that in the last year. I'm so proud.
That's so exciting. I have one more question before we get into our lightning round here. You talked about adding the B and the DEIB, and I've started to hear that a bit more. It's still not as common, but you're starting to hear it. And I think it's so important. And I think associations are such a great organization type to be able to talk about that, because associations are all about belonging and creating that sense of belonging and like you're a part of something bigger. I'd love to hear if you have one lesson learned as other associations are taking on these initiatives. Is there anything that stands out as this is something you should be thinking about?
I would, if I may, Colleen, I actually have two.
Okay, go for it. Let's hear them.
And one is just start. Right? It really is. And I think a lot of folks, especially in the DEI and DEIB space, are so scared of getting it wrong that it almost is an analysis paralysis around not starting your DEI journey. Please start. Take action. Take one step. Have one training for your members. Have one DEIB panel as part of your programs and initiatives. Just get started, because I will say for SWE, this has been an evolution, and you've heard me talking about it as we've gone through our conversation. We did not get it perfect the first time. We still don't have it perfectly figured out and are actively working on it, as you've heard me describe. And that is okay. Just get started, because it's such an important space. Honestly, associations really run the risk of being left behind if they do not actively get into DEI and B and don't start promoting more equitable and inclusive cultures. And then my second one is one I touched on earlier, but is don't be afraid to look internally at your own organization when you're thinking about DEI and B. A lot of folks tend to focus on their stakeholders and who they're connecting with outside. Please make sure that you are looking internally within your own organization and making sure that you are practicing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and how your organization is running, because that's such an important first step. And folks can see and tell outside, right? If it's something that you are preaching but not practicing, it will be obvious to those external stakeholders. So those are my two, Colleen.
Those are some really great takeaways. So valuable for our listeners. So I really appreciate that. We're going to jump into our just for fun portion here. So easy one to start off with. Tell us where you grew up.
So I grew up in Central Maryland, as is evidenced by the fact I say Maryland, not Maryland. Pasadena, Maryland, which is in between Baltimore and Annapolis. So okay. I've lived a couple different places, Atlanta, Buffalo, but yeah, ultimately came back to the DMV area, and I'm in the Washington, D.C. area now.
Very nice. Too funny, Buffalo. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and went to school in Rochester, so I know that area well.
Nice. Yes, Western New York represents.
Oh, yes. I don't need that cold anymore, though, so I'm down in the DMV area as well.
I always joke, I'm like, love the people, did not like the weather.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. All right, what's your Starbucks order?
Oh, I am skinny vanilla latte all day, hot. I'm always, even in the summertime, I'm a hot latte orderer. Judge if you want, great. Friends.
No, I love it. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still work?
Oh, that's a good one. I think this year might be an exception. I think if I won the lottery, I probably would have quit my day job so that I could completely concentrate on the SWE presidency alone just for this year. But I think in general, the answer is I would absolutely still work. I think that would open up some really great things around concentrating on probably more on things that relate to SWE's mission as well as continuing work in engineering and technology. But what I love when you don't have to worry about money, you can pave your own path to do whatever you want. Take the opportunity to do that. But I would still work.
All right, I like it. What's the last show that you binge watched?
We are big Star Wars fans in this house. And so we binge watched Ahsoka as a family. Once we waited for all the episodes of Ahsoka to come out on Disney Plus, and then we binge watched it together. I have several future Jedis in my home.
I love it. My 3-year-old sleeps with her baby Yoda every night. All right, what's a food you can't live without?
Oof. This is a tough one. I'm going to use this opportunity to say Girl Scout cookies and put a plug in for it's Girls, not just engineering week, everyone. It's also Girl Scout cookie season. So
it is.
I'm actually a leader for both of my daughter's troops, and I'm a big fan of Girl Scouts. Obviously, a lot of ties to SWE there in terms of promoting leadership and developing young women and girls. And yes, I will use this opportunity to say Girl Scout cookies, and in particular, Samoas.
Nice. And last one, what's your bucket list travel destination?
I am definitely someone who is feeling the less vacation travel from the last 5 years from the pandemic. I would really love some sort of like European tour. I think there's a lot of places in Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, that I have not visited before. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit and say not just one destination, but just the whole continent is something that I would be interested in traveling to. And maybe at the end of the SWE presidency and all this, we can, take a month-long trip.
If you ever get a break.
If I get a break and if I win the lottery.
There we go. We'll get you all set up.
All tied together. All right, it's playing, Colleen. I like this plan.
Amazing. Alexis, thank you so much. It was so interesting, so insightful. I know our listeners will just benefit so much from everything you shared. So truly appreciate you joining us on A100 today.
Thanks for having me, Colleen. It's been a pleasure. Really always excited to talk about the Society with Women Engineers and the work that we're doing.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Association 100 podcast, brought to you by the A100 publishing team, powered by Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications. You can subscribe to the Association 100 podcast on Spotify so you'll never miss out, or listen via our website at theassociation100.com. Follow us for all the latest insights and trends impacting the world of associations. Thanks for tuning in.